In ancient Egypt, bread was everything. Not only was it the cornerstone of their diet, but it was also a form of currency and often the way that you would get into the good graces of the gods. That's why they had so many types of bread, like this spiral boiled bread as seen on the tomb of Pharaoh Ramesses III. So thank you to Babel for sponsoring this video as we bake the bread of ancient Egypt, this time on Tasting History. Now, depending on the era, the ancient Egyptians had up to 40 different types of bread, or ta. I've actually made one of those 40. It was a simple Egyptian flatbread a few years back, but I've always wanted to make this one, not just because it's spiral and looks cool, but also because it was boiled before it was baked. Maybe. Because we don't know that for sure. Unfortunately, the ancient Egyptians didn't leave us any recipes. Instead, they left us pictures. But because they're just images, often shown out of order, it leaves a lot open to interpretation. So the recipe that I'm going to be using today comes from the Valley of the Kings on the walls of the tomb of Pharaoh Ramesses III, who reigned in the 20th dynasty from 1186 to 1155 BC. It starts off with an image of two men kneading dough with their feet. Above them we see baskets, presumably where the dough was left to ferment, just as it's still done in parts of Egypt today, and then some men bringing the dough to another who flattens it out and shapes it into some of the many forms that ancient Egyptian breads have been found to have. Everything from discs to the shape of a cow. There were also molds in which bread was baked, some like very long cones and others like triangles that I've always thought kind of looked like a Speedo. Then of course there is the spiral bread that we're making today. Other men are shown heating an unknown liquid, and beneath them are baskets of what might be dates or grapes or grain. For the cooking process, we see a man using sticks as if he's ready to place the spiral bread into another heated vat of liquid. Now, many Egyptologists interpret this as boiling, but maybe it's actually a liquid of oil and he's getting ready to fry it. It's really not known. In fact, there was one Egyptologist from the 19th century who thought he was boiling macaroni. But everything else on the wall seems to have something to do with bread, so it's probably bread as well. And since it's boiled, makes me wonder if the texture is not going to be a little bit like a bagel. After boiling, it shows a baker putting bread into a deep oven similar to a modern tandoor, and then there is more shaping, more baking, and carrying the finished bread. So would we call that a recipe? No, I don't think that we would, but that's okay, I'm still gonna make it. But it is why I tend to work with recipes that are actually written down in words, because even if they're not in English, at least I can translate them with some help from today's sponsor, Babel. Babel is one of the top language learning apps in the world, and it is a great way to learn a new language if you're planning on doing some traveling, or you need to learn a new language for work, or if you just want to get some self-improvement going. The lessons from Babel are nice and quick, about 10 minutes each, so you can fit them into your schedule very easily, and they like to focus on words and phrases that you'll find in real-world situations, like wir feiern ein Fest, we're throwing a party. And then, of course, I tend to use this phrase while I'm at any party, ich esse den Kuchen, which is I'm eating the cake. Babel also offers lessons specifically in pronunciation, as well as podcasts to help get the language into your ear. And to really get going on a new language, Babel now offers live lessons, and you get 2 free lessons with your subscription, plus a 20-day money-back guarantee. So to give Babel a try, just click my link in the description or scan this QR code up here and you'll get 60% off of your subscription. Now, while Babel does offer many, many languages, ancient Egyptian pictures is not one of them, it turns out. So I'm going to be relying on a lot of work from Egyptologists and archaeologists who really study this and have studied specifically the bread and grain found in different tombs from ancient Egypt. And so we are going to start with the grain, the most important part of any bread. So I'm going to be using 4 cups or 500 grams of barley and emmer. Barley and emmer were the 2 most common grains in Egypt, though they also used kamut and einkorn, but those are the 2 most common, so I'm going to blend them together because they often did blend them. And you can go ahead and grind them yourself. There's actually an inscription from the Old Kingdom tomb of Ti in Saqqara that says, "Grind, grind well, I grind with all my strength. The servant sifts the flour, and I bake the loaf myself." And really, you should try to grind flour at least once in your life. It's a lot of work, but then you'll appreciate pre-ground flour all the more. I ground my own when I made the Egyptian bread last time. This time, I found some stone ground flour, so it's coarse and it's gonna work just great. Then you'll need 2 teaspoons of salt, a half cup or 125 grams of sourdough starter. You can also use a pack of just dried yeast and some water. That will work just fine. Or if you really want to double down on the authenticity, you can do like the inventor of the Xbox, Seamus Blackley, did, and go scour ancient Egyptian pots for actual yeast. He took yeast out of these old pots and used it to make bread today. I'll put some links to more details on that. I'm not doing that because I can't, but it's really cool to read about. Now from here on out, the rest of the ingredients take a lot of guesswork because we don't know too much, especially when it comes to this specific loaf. The Egyptians sometimes used water to hydrate their bread, but they would also enrich it with some sort of fat or milk. So I'm actually going to be using 1 1/4 cup or 300 milliliters of warm goat's milk. And the Egyptians often flavored their breads, sometimes with things like coriander or fenugreek or cumin, or made them sweet with things like chopped up dates or figs or honey. I'm going to be using 3 tablespoons of date syrup. So first, whisk the salt into the flour and then add the sourdough starter and the milk and the date syrup and mix. Mix until it comes together to form a shaggy dough, set it in a bowl and cover with a damp towel for 30 minutes. Let it rest for 30 minutes, then take it out of the bowl and knead it for about 10 minutes. And when you're working with these kinds of grains rather than just modern wheat, they need a lot of work to build up any gluten. I'm actually going to knead this 3 times. I'm going to knead it, and then I'm going to set it aside for a half an hour and let it rest. Then I'm going to knead it a second time for 10 minutes, let it rest again for a half hour, and then a third time for another 5 or 10 minutes. And by then it should be a nice smooth dough. At that point, you can set it aside to ferment or rise. And if you're using like instant yeast or active dry yeast, probably an hour or an hour and a half will work. If you're using sourdough, it's going to take longer. Mine took about 4 hours to double in size, but that's what you're looking for the dough to double in size. Then turn it out onto a clean surface, divide the dough into 4 pieces, and roll them out into long ropes about as wide as your index finger. Then start to coil them around in a tight spiral, keeping it as flat as possible, and then tuck the end in under the dough and pinch it to the dough so it doesn't come apart when we boil them. And then set them on a baking sheet and cover them with a damp cloth and let them rise again for another couple of hours. When they look nice and puffy, they are ready, and you can bring 2 quarts of water to a boil and then add a 1/4 cup of honey. Now in the image of the Egyptians making this bread, it shows them using some sort of sticks to put these in the liquid. But I think that that's going to take a skill that I just don't have. I honestly can't even figure out how they're doing it. So I'm going to use like a strainer that you'd use for frying, and it's going to work very well. So put the bread into the water and let it boil for 2 minutes. If you have the skill to flip them, go ahead and flip them. I tried to do that and it kind of messed up the coil, so I ended up just leaving it with the coil on top and just kind of splashing hot water over it for the entire 2 minutes, and it seemed to work just fine. Once they're boiled, lift them out of the water and set them on a wire rack to dry and cool. Once they're cool, you can lift the loaves back onto the baking sheet and put them in the oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 218 Celsius and bake them for about 15 minutes, which should be plenty of time for us to head back to ancient Egypt and learn more about their delicious bread. The importance of bread in ancient Egypt cannot be overstated. In many ways, it is why ancient Egypt even existed as a civilization. The fertile fields along the Nile where grain was harvested allowed for the large population that was able to build a civilization that lasted for 3,000 years. A proverb from the New Kingdom said, "Do not let the granary be lacking in barley or emmer, for it is upon the granary that a house stands firm." That house in this case could refer to all of Egypt. because bread was absolutely everything. Bread and beer, which is just a drinkable form of bread, especially back then because it was actually made with bread. But not only did everybody eat it, but people were paid in it. The people that built the pyramids were largely paid in bread and beer. The average worker was paid in bread and beer. Soldiers were paid in bread and beer, and quite handsomely, I might add. The Middle Kingdom pharaoh Mentuhotep III boasted of how well he fed his army. "I advanced with an army of 3,000. The battle arena extended to the river and desert. I gave every man a skin of hide and a long stick to carry things, as well as 2 buckets of water and 20 loaves of bread for each day's ration." I guess they got water instead of beer, but they got a lot more bread, so it makes up for it. Especially if they're carrying around all of that bread. There was a lot of bread. Sometimes you'd receive a bit of food in addition to bread, like some laborers during the Old Kingdom who, in addition to 4 pounds of bread, also received 2 bundles of unnamed vegetables and an unspecified quantity of roast meat. And I'm guessing whatever food you got and how much of it kind of depended on who your boss was. Was it just some guy in middle management, or was it the pharaoh himself? Because Ramesses II, in addition to bread, hired 20 fishermen to supply fish to 40 workers and administrators who were building a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Though my question is, if they are getting paid with fish from fishermen that he hired, what were the fishermen getting paid? Yeah, answer me that. That one's going to keep me up at night. Now, while Ramesses II seemed to pay his workers very well, Ramesses III, not so much. He had some troubles making sure that payment came in on time. He's the one that actually is the tomb where our bread recipe comes from today. While they were building either his tomb or another tomb during his reign, the workers were supposed to be paid every month on the 28th day. Their bread and beer should show up. 6 months in a row, no bread and beer on the 28th day of the month, so they stopped working. They dropped their tools and said, "We're not doing this anymore. It is because of hunger and because of thirst that we come here. There is no clothing, no ointment, no fish, no vegetables. Send to Pharaoh our good lord about it, and send to the vizier our superior, that sustenance may be made for us." Making sure people had their bread, really food in general, was incredibly important, especially to the stability of the kingdom. It was the way that the pharaoh kept being pharaoh. When Akhenaten, the pharaoh that toyed around with monotheism, experienced any strife amongst his officials, which was rather often, he would throw them a banquet, making sure that they had more food than they could eat, and it seems that this ensured their loyalty. And just for future reference, that is also how you ensure my loyalty. More food than I can eat. Unfortunately, there were times in Egypt's history where even if the pharaoh wanted to give people their bread, their food, it just wasn't in the cards. There wasn't enough to go around, and when that happened, it was not good. It actually is one of the main things that led to the fall of the Old Kingdom. As I said, predictable flooding of the Nile kept the food coming in, and around 2150 BC, that predictability went away, and there were several years where there just was not enough flooding, and so there was not enough food, and already the government was teetering because of other issues. Let's just put it over the edge. Lo, the desert claims the land, towns are ravaged, Upper Egypt became a wasteland. Lo, everyone's hair has fallen out. Lo, great and small say, I wish I were dead. Lo, children of nobles are dashed against walls. Infants are put on high ground. Food is lacking. Wearers of fine linen are beaten with sticks. Ladies suffer like maidservants. Lo, those who are entombed are cast on high grounds. Men stir up strife unopposed. Groaning is throughout the land, mingled with laments. See now, the land is deprived of kingship. What the pyramid hid is empty. The people are diminished. According to one ruler in Upper Egypt, which is actually in the south, he said that it wasn't until he started to bring their grain to Lower Egypt, or the northern part of Egypt, that things started to become a little more stable. So the moral of the story is make sure people are fed. And that doesn't just go for the entirety of Egypt as a whole, but also on a smaller scale. For domestic tranquility, you need to make sure everybody's got enough bread. The maxims of the Vizier Tahotep during the 5th dynasty instructs, if you are wealthy and set up a household, be gracious to your wife according to what is fair. Feed and clothe her well. Make her happy all the days of your life. Because if you don't feed your wife, someone else will have to do it for you. There is a collection of papyri from Der el Medina. This was the village that housed all the workers who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And they tell us so much about daily life of kind of your average person at this period in time. There's one note from a worker whose co-worker, Ruti, has kicked his wife out of the house and stopped feeding her. His wife spent 40 days dwelling with me in my house, and I provided for her, giving her 1 sack of emmer and 10 loaves. And I assumed that it was her duty to grind that sack of emmer into flour, because it was very often the woman's job to do that, and it took a lot of work to do. But if you had a sister, you could often pawn that work off onto her. From Takenti Shepsa to her sister Ie, I shall send you barley, and you shall have it ground for me, and add emmer to it. And you shall make me bread with it, for I have been quarreling with Merimat, my husband. I will divorce you, he keeps saying when he quarrels with me, on account of my mother, questioning the amount of barley required for bread. Now your mother does nothing for you, he keeps telling me, and says, although you have brothers and sisters, they don't take care of you, he keeps telling me, in arguing with me daily. I love that these exist. So much of ancient Egyptian history is, found on like the walls of tombs of great pharaohs and viziers, and it's the events of big wars and politics and everything, and that's all really, really cool. But I am living for the hot goss in this little workers' village in the Valley of the Kings. Love it. Though there is some quality stuff in some of the more formal writings of the time, like the instructions of Ani, which were basically written from a father to a son, kind of telling him how to live life. And one of them starts off very sagely, give back in abundance the bread your mother gave you. Support her as she supported you. But then it goes on to basically become an ancient Egyptian guilt trip. Your mother had many burdens in you. You were born late, but she harnessed herself still, her breast in your mouth for 3 years while you flourished. Your excrement disgusted, but she was not disgusted, saying, what shall I do? She sent you to school when you were taught to write, and she waited for you daily with bread and beer in her house. You take care of your mother in her old age. I love these little parables, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, there are a lot of these wise sayings that have to do with bread, and some are even geared toward the Pharaoh himself. Like King Merikare was instructed that when people come to you to pay homage, you can't expect them to be as wealthy as you are. If one has no grain to give, be gracious, since they are humble before you, and be content with your own loaves of bread and beer. Granite comes to you unhindered, so do not destroy the monuments of another. Do not eat bread without giving some to those near you who do not have anything to eat, since the bread is eternal, while man does not last. Be content if you are satisfied with 3 loaves of bread and 2 cups of beer. If your stomach still feels hunger, resist it. Now those are all about treating your fellow man well and making sure that everyone is well fed. People. But it also applied to the gods. Enter the temple, eat bread in the house of the god, replenish the offerings, multiply the sacrificial loaves, increase the daily offerings. It profits him who does so. It was essential to offer bread to the gods, especially during festivals. There was one festival during the reign of Ramesses III to the god Amun-Ra, where it said that Ramses gave 2.8 million loaves of bread to the god. Of course, that bread was also for the people who were in the villages around the temple, because, the food would go to the god, sit on the altar. Once the god had had enough, then the priests would take the food and give it to the people and keep some for themselves. As one text from the Temple of Edfu explains, one lives on the provision of the gods, but this is always food which leaves the altar after the god is satisfied. My question is, how'd they know when the god was satisfied? I'm guessing nobody said, I'm done eating, right? I don't know. I guess the priest just kind of played that by ear. Either way, my bread is about to be done, and I am not going to offer it to Amun-Ra. I'm just going to go ahead and eat it right now. So once the bread is fully baked, remove it from the oven, set it on a wire rack to cool before eating, and here we are. The boiled spiral bread of Ramesses III. I gotta say, they turned out really, really well. I kind of thought while I was boiling them that they would completely disintegrate, but they didn't. They look a lot like, I'm gonna say cinnamon rolls or cow patties, but I'm gonna say cinnamon rolls. It smells so good. It must be the honey from the water. It does have a little honeyness on the outside. Let's open it up here. So it's very dense, which I knew it would be. Just with this grain, that's just what's going to happen. But it's not dry. It feels nice and moist. Let's give it a shot. Quite nice. There was a hint of sweetness to it because of the date syrup. I think it could have actually used a little bit more. If you make it, add a little bit more. These grains, while they're really dense, while they are heavy and are hard to work with, they actually provide more flavor than like all-purpose flour. It's a really flavorful bread. And then, you add a little bit of the date syrup and that just kind of adds another layer. But I think if you added fruit, or I think with this, it would probably be better with like fenugreek, cumin, something like that. It would just complement the flavors better, but really, really nice. The texture is dense. It's kind of chewy. It is kind of like a bagel. The outside is smooth like a bagel, so there is that. I wouldn't say that it is like a bagel entirely. It's very different, but it has some of the same characteristics. So this bread obviously was made here in my house, but it seems that the best bread of ancient Egypt was made in Thebes. The bread which is in it is more tasty than cakes made of goose fat. Its water is sweeter than honey. One drinks of it to drunkenness. Behold, this is how one lives in Thebes. I don't know that they're better than cakes made of goose fat, because I've never tried that, but maybe I'll try to figure out what they meant by that. And so, yeah, this with some water that I guess is very sweet, mighty fine. And I'll see you next time on Tasting History.